Welcome on behalf of the Walnut Valley Water District. Welcome to Firescaping. We are so grateful you showed up. Showed up to save your family, showed up to save your neighborhood, and showed up to create a healthier community. Thank you so much. We're really excited about this program. This recording is an abbreviated version of what you saw on Thursday. We had to shorten it and do some other things to ensure the quality of the sound and the images. So we hope you enjoy this presentation. We hope you get a lot out of it. So with that, I'm going to have to turn off my video when I do this presentation to narrate it. And so you'll just be seeing the slides and hearing my voice. So let's dig in and get started. I would first like to acknowledge Walnut Valley Water District for supporting and funding this presentation. And thank you very much again for everybody that showed up. Walnut Valley offers many landscaping classes, from removing your lawn, California-friendly plants, and working with California native plants. Go to their websites, check it out. There is a class near you that will benefit your landscape and your health. So check them out on their website. All right, let's get going. My name is Douglas Kent. I've been working on fire protection in California for the last 26 years. And just a couple quick questions. How many wildfires are there in California every year? And what's the significance of this picture? There are over 8,000 wildfires in California every year. This year, we're already above that average. We are an ignitable and combustible state and have been for hundreds of years. This picture below is the Witch Fire from 2007. It destroyed 1,200 structures, 2 lives, and it came on the heels of just a devastating fire season in 2003 and 2005. Then in 2007, Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger had had enough. He put the gauntlet down. He completely revamped California's building codes, redefined what defensible space meant in fire country from 30 feet to 100 feet, and greatly boosted the budgets of the firefighters in California. We now spend upwards of $2 billion a year beating back wildfires. That was 13 years ago. And since that complete revamp, California has experienced 13 of the 20 worst fires in the state's history, 7 of the top 10, 3 of the top 5, and the top absolute 2 have happened since the dramatic change in laws. It wasn't laws that Californians needed. We needed to arm, we needed to motivate ourselves and our individuals and our neighbors into creating fire-protected properties. This presentation covers the essentials. It will arm you to protect yourself. We'll be briefly looking at the roads, structures, small properties, defensible space, plants, and then a rousing and short conclusion. Roads are where you start. Roads are where people flee and fight. If life is lost during a conflagration, it is more likely to be lost on a road than anywhere else. And the reason being is you have hundreds or thousands of residents getting on the roads all at one time in an unplanned mass evacuation, which just absolutely creates gridlock. People dying in their cars is not uncommon during a wildfire. This road right here pictured is dangerous. It used to be a 2-lane road, but because of the densification of our cities and the need for parking, it is now a 1-lane road. It also has dead and dying branches overreaching the road, which would transmit a fire across it. This road is dangerous. I spent a complete day going through Walnut Valley's service area, examining Rowland Heights, Berea, Diamond Bar, and Walnut. And I found your roads are fantastic. They can handle a mass evacuation. You can see it here, 2 lanes, plenty of off-street parking, clearance on either side of the road of 5 feet with no flammable vegetation, great signage, your communities are ready to handle an emergency response and evacuation. Well done. But before you celebrate, just walk out to your road to make sure it has a couple key characteristics. One, make sure there's no dead, dying, or diseased vegetation on 10 feet of either side of the road. This dead and dying vegetation is the kindling for a fire. This is what firebrands ignite. Make sure your address is visible from the street. And this is a precaution for everyday emergencies. You never know when you're going to need emergency personnel. Make sure that there's off-street parking, which really isn't a problem in a majority of your service area. Manage overhanging branches, which again wasn't much of a problem. And communicate and negotiate with your neighbors. This is a good example of an effective road. This is the Santa Ana foothills. Since 2001, that hill behind has had 2 major fires. This small and old community has survived both of those, a large part due to this fantastic road. 2 lanes, off-street parking, good clearance on either side of the road. The structures have been properly maintained. And the overhanging branches don't reach along the entire road, but just some parts to slow the drivers, calm them, and create that rural feel. They have done a fantastic job. Now, structures. This is the second most important thing. You are more likely to lose your structure from a firebrand than direct flame contact. We have seen this time and time again throughout all the fires in California. A firebrand is a spark, a burning ember that is shot up into the atmosphere and then pushed ahead of the wall of flames by the wind. These burning embers can fly a quarter mile, half a mile, sometimes up to a mile ahead of the wall of flames. These 2 pictures illustrate it perfectly. There is no fire in this little canyon. The fire is behind this ridge, and firebrands were blowing up and over the ridge, igniting anything that was flammable. Just so turns out that the 2 most flammable things in this little canyon were the houses. We have to start with the houses to protect our communities. We need fire-hardened structures. Some of the key characteristics of a fire-hardened structure is naturally the roof. Only Class A is allowed in California now, so more likely than not, you have a fire-retarding roof. The eaves of a fire-hardened structure are properly maintained. If you're building a house, you're going to make those eaves small, but if you already have an existing house, then you're just going to make sure that they're immaculately maintained, that they're painted, that there's no peeling paints or toe holds for those firebrands to stick. Eaves are a vulnerable part of your structure. Openings. You want to make sure that all the openings in your structure are properly screened from firebrands. So all your vents, air vents in the structure have nothing less than 1/8 inch wire mesh on them. All your open windows have the proper screens on front of them. And even the doors and the windows have proper weatherization around them. It is not uncommon for a firebrand to go in through the garage door, even though it's closed, those gaps in between the front of the house and the garage door without proper weatherization can allow a firebrand to penetrate the structure. Make sure your openings are screened and weatherized. Naturally, the windows, you'd want double pane windows, which would help prevent the radiant heat from being transmitted into the structure. You'd prefer if the windows were smaller when they face the high fire hazard areas. The siding is non-flammable, but that doesn't mean it has to be stucco, which is probably the best. But I've seen structures survive in fire country with wood siding. The trick here is just to make sure that it is immaculately maintained with no splits or fissures, no peeling paints, no place for a firebrand to attach to the structure and ignite it. You'll also notice that these big paths around the structure, no less than 4 feet, to allow emergency personnel to run around your structure with equipment and efficiently and effectively fight that fire. Landscape materials are non-flammable or have a 1-hour fire-resistant rating. There's no stuff like compost, trash, tools, lumber stored up against the house. And we'll talk about that in a couple slides. And again, make sure your address is visible from the street. This is really important. This is a good example of a fire-hardened home. This was in the 2003 old fire in San Bernardino. 103 structures were lost in that fire. And you can see this house obviously survived. Great fire-resistant roof, and it's shaped in the shape of the slope. So the winds and the firebrands just naturally flow over it. It's not a big blockage. It doesn't actually block the wind. Incredible siding, fire-resistant siding that looks like wood, ample paths around the entire structure. And look at that driveway, generous driveway for the fire engine to pull up, lay out equipment, and effectively fight that fire. I might add too that this lawn area didn't actually have to be lawn for that structure to be saved. The reason that lawn was so beneficial is it didn't have any dead, dying, or diseased vegetation. There was nothing to ignite. And you could have done that with a variety of ground covers: gazania, diamondia, Santa Barbara daisy. Even inorganic mulches would have provided that same amount of protection. They have created a fire-protected property. This is a close-up of a fire-hardened structure. And you can see the shingles look like wood, but they're not. They're a concrete composite. They have double-paned, small windows, no ignitable debris immediately up against the structure. All their appendages, like the rain gutters, downspouts, are all fire resistant. The trim around the windows, a vulnerable spot on many structures, has been perfectly maintained. They put a soffit over the entryway. And what the soffit does is it protects the rafters and the underbelly of the roof from the intense heat and the firebrands. It protects a vulnerable part of your home. They also have key big lighting at central points, at key points on their property. So your entrances should always have bright lights to guide emergency personnel to the key parts of your property. This house has many winning characteristics. I would just like to add that sometimes I'm a little, bewildered that I actually still have a job at this. And the reason being is Californians actually knew how to live with fire 300 years ago when the Spanish missionaries came into the state. They built structures and compounds that allowed the world to burn around them. They created a sanctuary, and you can see this in their architecture: non-flammable sidings, small windows, non-flammable roof, small eaves, and the landscape would have been all use: food production, livestock, tanning, milling. All those endeavors are less flammable. Not one mission has ever been lost to a wildfire in California. Now, small properties, which was the bulk of your service area, demand special attention. When we lose thousands or hundreds of structures in California, it's probably because this fire went through a community with small lots. And the problem with small lots is houses burn between 1,500 and 2,000 degrees. It produces enough radiant heat to ignite anything within 20 feet of it. Small lots are sometimes no more than houses on small lots are sometimes no more than 12 feet apart. You can see this in the tunnel fire of the Oakland Berkeley Hills in 1991, 2,900 homes, 25 lives lost, all in just 10 hours. And look at here too, you can see the impacts of firebrands. This is starting a fire well ahead of the wall of flames. This is the San Bernardino fire, the old fire of 2003. And you can see it really wasn't a brush fire. It wasn't a hill fire. This right here in this tract, it was a structure fire. One of the homes went and they just fell like dominoes. This is the devastation of the Tubbs fire of 2017. Over 5,400 structures destroyed, 22 lives. It still has a devastating impact on that community. And this is the tragic Camp Fire, California's worst conflagration, destroying 18,000 homes, leveling the town, and taking 86 lives. And here again, you can see that the forest is mostly intact. It's the development that was the most flammable thing on that landscape. We need to fire harden our homes. There was a lot of risk in this regard when it came to the communities within the Walnut Valley service area. And the picture below illustrates this. These homes would assume to be in low-risk areas. But if one of them is poorly maintained, and when this hill ignites, and it's when, not if, when this hill ignites, it's going to produce firebrands. And if those firebrands find one of those poorly maintained homes, it would ignite and spread the fire down the block. These homes need to be as fire prepared and fire hardened as the homes on the top of the ridge. Some of the key attributes of a good small property is, first and foremost, create multiple ways off your property. We saw this in the tunnel fire and the Tubbs fire. Well, people had hemmed themselves in on three sides, and the only way off the property was through the front door and to the street, and yet that is where the fire was coming from. Communicate with your neighbors. Create gates in between the properties for any type of emergency, whether it's fire or earthquake. Importantly, create a non-flammable barrier in between the two properties. Cinder block, concrete cinder block fences would be absolutely ideal in this situation. And what you're trying to do is prevent that radiant heat from spreading from house to house. Share vegetation. If you get along with your neighbor, you both don't need huge trees. You can share the expense of one large tree to provide benefits for both properties. You'd want only the most fire resistant and fire retarding plant material on your property. Although this wasn't an issue, just make sure you're solid on your block. Make sure there's off-street parking so you can ensure that you have evacuation and the people coming in to fight the fires, the emergency personnel, have a clear lane to charge ahead at no less than 25 miles an hour. And then pools can become an asset in small lots. You can throw your valuables in there and flee. Emergency personnel can use the water, throw a pump in there and actively fight the fire with your pool. And as we saw in the Tubbs fire, a couple actually spent the night in their pool and survived that devastation. Pools can become an asset. These are the characteristics of a small property. And this is just a good example. This is Mount Washington in downtown LA. It is exceptionally fire prone, has a long history with fire. And here we can see that this older structure, probably early 1980s, is just in bad shape and a little firebrand trap. The fascia right here is splitting from the roof, creating gaps for firebrands to attach. Even the peeling paint provides a toehold. The lap strake siding is in bad shape and prying apart. Here again, and even here, exposing the interior of the interior of the structure. This house is a firebrand trap. You have unprotected overhangs right here where the wood is in bad shape. And here again, this stairway needs paint and care, especially on the underside of that deck, which is one of the most vulnerable places. It also has large single pane windows, which would easily transmit the heat into the structure. The house on the right is just the opposite. Non-flammable siding, non-flammable appendages. The underside of all these small decks have been protected with stucco. This house is fire hardened. Unfortunately, I don't know enough to know that if the house on the left went, the house on the right wouldn't. So I hope I'll never find that out. So here's some things that we can all do, whether you're a renter, a homeowner with a lot of means, or a homeowner with no means. There are still things we can do to reduce the risk immediately around our home. First, make sure all your openings are screened. This is really important. A firebrand entering the structure creates a high likelihood of ignition from within the structure. So make sure your vents openings are screened. Make sure your weatherization is solid. Please check all openings first. Clean the roof and the gutters. I really should have bolded the word gutters and not roof, because gutters are incredibly dangerous if they're full of ignitable debris. And the reason being, if a fire starts in the gutter, it can travel three ways. It can go up the rafters and the plywood. It can go across the beams and the joist, or it can go down the post and the studs. Gutters are a highly vulnerable spot of your structure. Please start cleaning them in July and keep them clean until the first week in November, when hopefully we're out of the fire season. Manage the seams and fill the gaps. This is a great example, the picture to the right. If this were my structure, I would take a power washer, knock that peeling paint right off, let it dry, fill the gaps with caulk or silicone to make sure the firebrands can attach, and then just apply a cheap coat of paint on it to protect that wood. Just that defense alone would create a wall where the firebrands would hit it and just drop. There's no place for those firebrands to stick. And lastly, make sure your address is visible from the street. This is an everyday need. You never know when you're going to need emergency personnel at your house. Defensible space. This is really where I got started in the 1990s. I have since learned that roads and structures play a greater role in home site protection, but it's still just as important. This is just a notable note and a kudos to LA County. Really, the modern era of firefighting and structure loss in California happened in the Bel Air fire of 1961. Up to that point, most Californians lived in the cities. The only people up in the hills were the goat tenders, the beekeepers, the outlaws, and the moonshiners. But with the advent of our car culture, people no longer had to live next to their job or their grocery store, and they just fled to the hills, got away from the crime and the grime, and that really ushered in the modern era. And the 1961 Bel Air fire was the first fire in California where rich people lost their lives and average people lost their homes. This is when federal and state funding roared into LA County to stop this problem from ever happening again. And the zone theory was born out of the Bel Air fire and all the work in the early 1970s. The zone theory is now a model that's used throughout the nation. And it just involves 3 zones around your house. Zone 1 is the garden zone. And this is where the goal of this zone is to endure intense heat and an onslaught, 4 days, if not weeks, of firebrands, all without igniting. The second zone, the green belt, is where the fire is actively extinguished. Whether it's a ground fire or a canopy fire, it doesn't come closer to your home than zone 2. And then about 70 feet out from a structure to 100 feet or your property line is zone 3. And the goal here is really vegetation management. The job is to reduce the severity of the wildfire. So we have slow the wildfire, stop the wildfire, and then endure the firebrands that come from the wildfire. This is a model picture that CAL FIRE used to use just several years ago, and it highlights these zones. You can see the garden zone, and it survived that onslaught of firebrands with igniting. Zone 2, they went for scorched earth here. They took the vegetation down to mineral, right down to the soil, and it did a fantastic job of stopping that fire. And then the outward areas, you can see that the fire roared, but it was able to be extinguished in zone 3. Every zone did its job. Unfortunately, this is not the Californian I work for. This is LeBron James or Mike Trout or Kershaw. This is somebody with an incredible amount of means and an incredible amount of water. This is not the Californian I work with. In this presentation, I'm just going to focus on the garden zone, zone 1, the first 30 feet. And the reason I'm going to do that, if you have a fire hardened structure, and if you have 30 feet of defensible space, nothing will ignite. You have a 90% chance of survival with just a fire hardened structure and 30 feet of defensible space. And this picture illustrates it wonderfully. Big, wide, stable paths for emergency personnel, non-flammable materials everywhere. Even this plastic chair is made out of nylon, and it will just melt in intense heat. The vegetation is magnificently maintained and irrigated, and even the mulching, it's no more than a half an inch or an inch. It's not 3 or 4 inches. It's just enough to cool the soil, slow evaporation, and nourish the plants, but no more. Now, before I go into the real nitty gritty of defensible space, we need to talk about the first 5 feet. The first 5 feet next to a structure plays a disproportional role in its survival. And the reason being is that if a fire starts next to a structure, the flames are elongated because of compression and convection. So if you had a fire that was burning in the open and it produced a 3-foot flame, if you had that same fire next to a structure, it would produce a 6 or 7 foot length flame, just enough to reach the trim around your windows, to crawl into openings, and to endanger the eaves of your house. Manage that first 5 feet. That is your biggest priority in defensible space. So please do not have any storage. No trash cans, no piles of lumber, toy boxes, compost bins. All that stuff is at least 5 feet off the structure. Absolutely no flammable plants. No junipers or eucalyptus or cypress or Italian cypress. I saw that a lot in your community, Italian cypress up against the structure. And absolutely no woody, dry organic mulches. So that's like the gorilla hair and those big pieces of bark, which are really ignitable. You want to avoid that. If you have to use compost or mulch, then use humus, the most decomposed and moist. But some of the other mulches you could use would be inorganic, like pea gravel, decomposed granite, or river rock. And avoid the use of fabrics. So that would be awnings, umbrellas, even seat cushions. It's not that your landscape can't have these, just either push them out into the landscape during fire weather or bring them indoors. And then avoid erecting shade structures within 5 feet of the house. Now, LA County actually outlaws shade structures now being built onto the structure in fire country. So check your local code if you're planning to build a shade structure. Can you guys see this? Are you seeing the same thing I was seeing? I was doing analysis for the city of Anaheim, not far from you at all. And we're in a very, very high fire hazard area, and everything was getting checked off perfectly. This house and all the houses in the tract were looking great. Impeccable maintenance, clean roofs, weatherization was fantastic, great access. But look at this, 5 feet right up against the house, piles of lumber and stored debris in plastic containers. Here again, I do not know enough to know that if that pile of lumber were ignited, which is a high probability in low humidity, hot temperatures, and big winds, I do not know enough to know if that structure would be inflamed. But it would greatly damage the structure, and it would divert emergency personnel from maybe more pressing work. Manage that first 5 feet. And it's so easy to overlook it. And then shade structures. You really want to create a gap between the shade structure and your house. And the reason being is shade structures are vulnerable, highly vulnerable. They're usually made from softwoods. They degrade quickly. They live really no longer than 8 to 15 years, and they need constant maintenance, which sometimes fails. Disconnect that shade structure from your house. Leave a gap. And if I was your designer, I would tilt that shade structure as well to always allow that warm and hot air to rise through convection out of that structure. Make sure that those firebrands and that heat never gets held up in that shade structure. You'd also build it out of non-flammable materials or wood with at least 1 hour fire resistant rating. Keep it really well maintained. And then all the plants next to the shade structure would be the most fire retarding. This was a common situation I found in the Walnut Valley service area. And this is just a shade structure, and you can see that it really needs some maintenance. These fine slats, which I now think are illegal in LA County, need some paint. They're twisting, splitting, and would definitely catch a firebrand if that shade structure were to ignite. And this home is solid. This is a fire-hardened structure, but if this shade structure were to ignite, it would bring that fire right under this other shade structure, greatly endangering that house. And this was common, whether it was a commercial property, a campus property. I saw these structures throughout your service area. And this is one of the biggest liabilities in the Walnut Valley District. Some good examples, though, and your community had plenty of good examples. Probably the best was the Diamond Bar Community Center. That structure alone is a fortress, but the landscape is wonderfully maintained. Great separation between water conserving plants, some mulch, but not 4 inches of mulch everywhere. Properly irrigated, but not over irrigated. Just a wonderful defense. If you're looking for ideas for plant selection or firescaping, I would recommend going to the Diamond Bar Community Center. But there was other examples too. This is in Walnut, and we're just seeing loads of good defensible space, great plant care, good selection of materials. Now, I really couldn't do analysis of the backyards of these properties, so I really don't know if there was piles of leafy debris up against the house and how their weatherization was. But from a distance, there was so much good news in your community. And this is just one more example of defensible space. This is in a very high fire hazard area. And this property has so many winning characteristics. It is water conserving. The plant selection is just eccentric. And those sagos are just beautiful. Everything would be able to withstand a firebrand attack, with the exception of this one shrub, this Eugenia right here, Australian cherry. The interior of that topiary is just filled with fine, dead debris. If a firebrand found that and ignited its interior, it would greatly imperil this small eaves right here. I understand the design need for this plant. I would remove it and put a nice statue there with maybe ivy geraniums at its base. Please do not plant flammable plants within the first 5 feet. Other than this house is a great example of people showing their individual characters and being fire safe at the same time. We do need a quick talk about fences. Fences are huge liabilities. They become freeways for fire in fire country, and this shows it. Cheap, soft woods that are obviously in a state of decay, lined with Italian cypresses that should have been removed 3 or 4 years ago. This is a firebrand trap and will become a freeway for a fire. So when you're managing fences in fire countries, restrict the use of non-flammable material. Restrict the use of flammable materials. You really don't need wood from 8 feet to the ground. You can use different materials to reduce the amount of combustibility. And below is just a good example of a good fence in fire country. There was one thing that I really need to share with you. Back in 2008, part of my graduate work at Cal Poly Pomona, I did a survey of compliance with state fire code in Rowland Heights. And it was just a couple months before the Freeway Complex fire. And that fire was started by the 91. It roared through the Anaheim Hills and ended up being beat back on the 57 freeway, not without destroying 314 structures. Had that fire crossed the 57 freeway, it would have gone into my service area, which would have been unfortunate. Because in that survey, I found that only 23% of the properties I surveyed had just 30 feet of defensible space. And on the large properties, only 7% had 100 feet of defensible space, which is the state law. People complying with vegetation clearance is the exception, not the rule. And this house in Rowland Heights really just showcased it for me. Leafy debris around all sides of the structure. Fascia was degrading, but from a defensible space point of view, they maintain their backyard as a shaded, woody retreat. But unfortunately, they were not removing the dead, dying, and diseased vegetation, and you can see all this dead material in these trees. I know it's a little hard to see in this picture, which is unfortunate because the hill behind them someday is going to ignite. And at some point, a firebrand is going to land on this backyard, and it needs to do a far better job of protecting the occupants. So take care of your first 30 feet, if nothing else. Now, there's stuff we can all do, whether you're a renter, homeowner, commercial property owner. There are things we can do that do not require a lot of money, but can have a big impact. First, remove all the flammable materials from 5 feet of your structure. Remove the dead, dying, and diseased vegetation. That is the kindling for a wildfire. That's how wildfires spread. Maintain an inviting driveway. Get those firefighters to your house. And please do not let your plants dry out. If California goes to another drought, actually, when California goes to another drought, we may have mandatory restrictions. If that's the case, you cannot just turn off your water and hope for the best. If you turn off your water, we have to remove the vegetation that was dependent on that water. And we have seen that the devastations of fires in urban areas when we've had droughts can be really dramatic. So please do not overwater, but do not let your plants dry out. Now, plants, since we're on the subject of plants, everybody loves plants. But with 2,800 commercially available plants in California, it is so difficult to create a comprehensive plant list. So knowing the traits of a less flammable plants is actually more important than just remembering plant lists, because you can select any plant now if you know the characteristics. So broadleaf plants are less flammable than conifers. So that means as a ground cover, this coral bells would be less flammable than juniper. Moist and easily bent leaves. So if you can take the leaf and twist it in your hand without it cracking or tearing, you have a less flammable leaf. A good example would be Dodondia, the hopseed. When you twist that leaf, it makes an audible crack. I mean, the leaf cracks when you twist it, and it is a highly ignitable leaf. Thick leaves are less flammable than thin leaves. A low amount of litter, naturally. Any plant that produces less kindling would be beneficial. Sap that looks more like water instead of pitch or resin. Plants without a fragrance. Plants with fragrance just mean it's high in oils. They are more ignitable as a consequence. Plants with silver or gray leaves are less flammable than just flat out green leaves. And the reason being, to get that gray in their leaves, they pull minerals from the soil and put them in their leaves. So it has a really high mineral content. It makes it less ignitable and combustible. And then plants without hair, like the California sycamore and the Fremontia. These are hairy plants and they tend to catch firebrands. Now, back in the 1970s, from the LA Arboretum, a guy named Kenneth Montgomery started burning hundreds of plants. And he developed two types of plant lists from these burnings. One was fire retardant. These plants would just wilt and sizzle in intense heat, but really not produce much of a flame. Whereas fire resistant plants would produce a flame, but they kind of quickly extinguish it. Fire-resistant plants had one more benefit, is that they could recover from injury a lot better than fire-retardant plants, which is important if you're managing a slope, hill, or any kind of topsoil loss. So some of the fire-retardant plants that Kenneth discovered was lily of the Nile, carex, our native grass, redbud, our native redbud, coral bells, crepe myrtle, fescue, flax, gazania, grapes, if they're well maintained, liquid amber, philodendron, photinia, ribes, which is our gooseberry and concurrent, and all the succulents, which include cacti, are fairly fire retardant if they are maintained. Fire resistant plants, now these are the ones that can actually survive a fire and resprout, which is really important for topsoil loss. That would be the California lilac, the ceanothus, the artemisia, rock rose, coffeeberry, all the oaks are fantastic. Cotoneaster, laurel sumac, lemonade berry, and that includes all russuses like the sugar bush. Mallows are fantastic. Manzanita, prickly pear, verbena, toyon, and yarrow are all exceptionally water conserving. Most of those are California natives, and they all recover quickly from the damage of a wildfire. Now, if I was your designer, I'd probably work with a plant list with you. We'd develop a theme for your garden, and then I would come up with a plant list that would support that theme. Some of the neat themes I've worked with in the years have been bird. Gardening for birds is a fantastic endeavor, just loads of fun. And there are so many plants that we use that have fire resistant qualities. Clarkia, elderberry, manzanita, milkweed, redbud, yarrow, ribes, even the wild rose is fantastic for birds and fire protection. Food has been saving Californians for hundreds of years, and it comes in all varieties from annuals, biennials to shrubs, trees, and vines. Growing food can create protection and nourish you. There's medicine. We can start growing medicine in our garden, and we're seeing a resurgence of this since COVID. Everybody's looking for immunity boosters in their own backyard, which I think is super duper smart. And this would be dandelion, elderberry again, horehound, mint, rue, yerba mansa are wonderful for your body. Succulents, including cacti, are fantastic temperate plants, which means that they evolve from a cold climate, so they love that cold, long winter. And these are bulbs, dogwood, hydrangea, maple, serviceberry, and viburnum all provide protection if they're maintained. And then tropical. Now, I really can't recommend tropicals from a water conservation point of view, but from a living point of view and from a fire protection point of view, they are incredible. Really, what beats an avocado for fire protection? Moist, huge, supple leaves, 79 cents, falls from the sky. Bananas, citrus, daylily, dracaena, guava, mango, papaya, philodendron, and taro are all excellent. So if you have an alternate source of water, you're collecting rainwater or diverting your gray water, I would recommend planting tropical plants. And then natives, which is a big push right now. Of all the native plant communities in California, the three I've worked with most efficiently in fire country are chaparral, desert, and woodland understory. Chaparral are the plants that grow about 15 feet tall, so about 3 to 15 feet tall. You can find them in Sacramento, through the Sierra Nevadas, even in Northern California. They have a natural burn cycle of anywhere from 25 to 70 years. They are tough, durable, and can survive California's environment. California fuchsia, coffeeberry, island mallow, oak, russus, and toyon are all representative of that plant community. Desert. A lot of the desert plants we use in California gardens come from the monsoon adapted areas, so like the Sonora Desert. And monsoon adapted is really an interesting plant palette because you really only ever irrigate 2 times a year, winter and summer. You shut off that irrigation in spring and fall. If you have a rot problem with your desert plants, it's probably because you were irrigating in spring or fall. Agave, buckthorn, desert tea, mesquite, palo verde, and yucca are all representative of that. And then woodland understory. These are the plants that grow under the canopy of trees. They like filtered shade, some moisture, rich soils. These plants are naturally fire resistant. Columbine, ferns, iris, ribes, rose, and viola, the plant of love, all thrive in urban environments, especially on the north and east sides of the structures. These are just some of the many plant lists you can use in fire country. But here's the thing, and I'm just going to come out and say it. Plant lists are stupid. I have been on so many fires now. Every plant I have ever recommended, I've seen burnt to a crisp. And some of the plants I've recommended against, I've seen survive. Really, at the end of the day, it's maintenance that determines a plant's flammability, not its name. Forget its name. Maintenance is the fulcrum of fire safety. If it's old, diseased, injured, pest infested, or not healthy, dead, dying, it will ignite. And this is an excellent example. This plant right here is Santolina. It's on everybody's fire retardant or fire resistant plant list. It's an herb. And when it's young, it's incredible. It wouldn't ignite, but this would absolutely catch a firebrand, ignite, and transmit that heat right through that thin single pane window and ignite those thin old curtains. This house is imperiled by fire resistant plants. Maintenance is the fulcrum. This is just another good example. I was one of the keynotes at the Remembrance for the campfire last year. And driving through the community, you didn't see any houses, but you saw loads of juniper. And they just love that cold weather and thrive. They were the least ignitable thing on that landscape. If your plant is properly maintained, it has a good chance of survival. And this is one more example. This is an article I wrote for the Marin Independent Journal in 1995 on the attributes of a winning house in fire country. This is Miss Bayless. 3 of every 4 homes in her tract were destroyed, and partly due is because they live in a bishop pine forest. Bishop pines need fire to open up their pine cones to spread their seeds. They are a fire-dependent plant, and yet she survived in a landscape that absolutely welcomes fire. You can too. The key characteristics are wonderful fire-hardened structure, great first 5 feet, open, wide, stable paths around her entire structure. There's no dead, dying, or diseased vegetation. She was impeccable in her maintenance. She only left half an inch of mulch, an inch of mulch. She didn't let it pile up to 3 to 4 inches. And she was constantly removing the dead and dying branches from the bishop pines. She survived because of maintenance, not because of plantless. So here's some things that anybody can do. Renters, homeowners, commercial property owners, remove the dead, dying, and diseased vegetation. You're probably getting sick of me saying that, but that is the kindling. That is how a fire spreads. Remove the fuel. Replace vegetation before it becomes an economic liability and a fire risk. Sometimes you just got to be tough and be that mean parent with your landscape and remove plants that have high emotional value but are just put your family at risk. And then please do not let your plants dry out. Californians just simply can't turn off the irrigation to our planted landscape. We have to maintain what we put in. All right, now the conclusion. You live in fire country. Most of Californians do. At least 10 million Californians live in fire country. And it's sort of like living in bear country. Bear country, if you've ever lived in there, you have a code of conduct and ethics. So you would never leave your garage door open. You'd never leave pet food out. You'd never leave your pets out after dark. You'd have certain types of trash cans. You would never, ever leave food in your car, and you would never leave your car unlocked. If you didn't do these things, you would pay for it immediately. And what's interesting about bear country is no matter where you go, Montana, Colorado, San Bernardino, Canada, everybody knows this ethic, this code of conduct. Same with fire country. We need to develop an identity about living in fire country. You live in fire country. You should be able to talk to any Oregon person, any Oregon resident, or Arizona resident, or Canadian resident about how to protect yourself, because this is our ethic. These are our rituals. We manage our roads. We create fire-hardened structures. We make sure that there's no flammable material around that first 5 feet, no less than 30 feet of defensible space. And we know that plant care and plant maintenance is more important than just plant selection. So please create an oasis. Create a home when they give an evacuation order that you'd want to go home. You wouldn't want to flee from it. We can create our own Edens. So living in fire country is a privilege. It's beautiful. The smells are intoxicating. We just need to do a better job of protecting ourselves and learning to live alongside the inevitability of fire. So thank you so much for letting us present this information. And I'd like to point out too that this book, California Friendly, is just a maintenance guide on how to manage California friendly plants. It includes everything from ground covers, shrubs, trees, succulents, watering systems, stormwater management, even how to manage mulches. This book is free. You can download it off bewaterwise.com, and you can download individual chapters or the entire book. So we just like to point out this is a fantastic resource for maintaining your garden, and it is free. So once again, thank you very much on behalf of the Walnut Valley Water District. Thank you for showing up to protect your house, your family, and your neighborhood. We really appreciate your time, and we hope this works. So take care, and maybe we'll see you soon. Bye.